Hi folks, and welcome back to Contract Law. This is the video series on the vitiating factors of duress, undue influence and unconscionable conduct. And I call them the big V3. That's right, yes folks, if you ever want your client to get out of a contract, these vitiating factors certainly pack a punch. So let's jump into the Prezi. And what we're going to do today is I'll do a short video to start with, just drawing together some common threads that run throughout all of these vitiating factors. And then we'll go into and explore each of the vitiating factors in turn. So looking first at our overview and the common threads. Now, as we go through the various vitiating factors today, you will find that there are some common themes, and inevitably you will also make some links back to some of the material we've covered in other video series. And in this respect, I'm particularly thinking of misrepresentation, and misrepresentation was actually argued in tandem with unconscionable conduct in one of the significant cases that we'll look at today. So hopefully you'll start to see the coalescence and the ability to see a fact scenario and run any number of these vitiating factor arguments for that one factual scenario. So you'll hopefully start to draw some links with what you've learned before. But in terms of today's material, you should hopefully see some common threads between all of these vitiating factors. The main common thread is that you will have a dominant party and a weaker party. And the dominant party will use their position of power or influence in some way to obtain a benefit, and the weaker party will provide the benefit. The main distinguishing point between these three causes of action is what the court focuses on when they are looking at the providing of the benefit by the weaker party. And for duress and undue influence, the court tends to focus on the issue of consent. For unconscionable conduct, the court tends to focus more on the dominant party's actions. So it's a good kind of handy way to tell the difference between the various different causes of action. We'll look at duress first. So duress is a common law action, so that's the first thing that you need to note. It's not a creature of equity, and so it demands a very high level of improper action on the part of the dominant party in order to taint the contract with this vitiating factor. So contractual assent is going to be affected by fairly extreme pressure, illegitimate pressure, in terms of threats to person, property, or economic interests. And the pressure is sometimes described as compulsion, coercion, extortion, exaction, or force. So as you can see, all of those synonyms describe a pressure that is quite extraordinary. And because of that extraordinary pressure, it's sometimes said that the victim's will is overborne. In the case law, you'll see judges discussing the fact that they only decided to give this or sign that contract because their will was overborne. In the more recent case law, you'll see judges talking about the plaintiff having no real practical alternative than choosing the course that they chose. They didn't really want to sign the contract, for example, but really in the circumstances there was nothing else that they could do. So that's the extreme nature of a threat in duress. In terms of undue influence, this is a creature of equity, and it actually grew out of the cases of duress where no remedy could be provided at common law for the plaintiff. And you can see equity stepping in to try and fix injustice where injustice was obvious. Here we have the case law providing remedies where you've got one party using their capacity to influence. It might not be a threat of the kind of extreme type that you would find in a case of duress, but nevertheless, that capacity to influence is used in a way that's what we would call undue, inappropriate, unconscientious. So there's a clear overlap in an action for duress and an action for undue influence, particularly category 1 actual undue influence, which we'll talk about in just a moment. There's a nice little debate in the academic commentary about whether or not there's a whole lot of use for the common law action of duress. Some commentators think that the action's really been subsumed by the equitable doctrine of undue influence. The text seems to think otherwise. I'll leave you to ponder that in your own time. But in terms of the issue of consent for undue influence, it's the same kind of consideration that a court will make of the factual circumstances as for duress. So often in cases of undue influence, you will see the court discussing the fact that the victim's will was overborne. Again, it just really means that they didn't lack capacity to contract. They knew what they were doing. It's just that they had really no other practical alternative available to them. So that's undue influence. In terms of unconscionable conduct, the victim's consent is not really due to a threat or some kind of undue influence. The victim's consent really is as a result of their disadvantageous position and the other party really exploiting that disadvantageous position. So the court takes a slightly different approach here, and the focus, instead of being on the quality of the victim's consent, the quality of the consensus ad idem, I guess, if you will, the court looks at what exactly the dominant party did, and was it unconscientious? Did it pass that, what I call the smell test, or not?
Do you smell it? That smell.
Was there some kind of impropriety in the works there? If there was, then it may well be labelled advantage taking and therefore unconscionable conduct. So you can see, whilst all three causes of action do depend on having a dominant and subservient party, the way that the courts tackle these causes of action and where their focus lies in their analysis is quite different for unconscionable conduct than it is for duress and undue influence. So that's a nice, handy little way of perhaps distinguishing between the three causes of action. And that is our overview. So this is the end of video 1, and I'll see you in video 2, folks. Bye for now.